I noticed it's like the keypad for this phone is not that sensitive, so it's always needing for you to keep clicking and clicking and clicking and clicking. I think so, guys. You need to keep it low and all your paper clicks. I think I'm good with the CDs I have already. I'm good. Just that's all. That's all. Don't give me mine again.
That's sweet.
Sorry?
That's sweet.
Yes, no, I'm good with what you've given me so far. That's fine. Okay. Good morning, everyone. This is Joseph Oduboye again, and we promised to be here today to discuss on fraud detection and prevention. And of course, it's opening our eyes to the trend. End of the year is known for a lot of things. In the common space, a lot of us expect festivity, a lot of us expect events, a lot of people expect parties, a lot of people expect different wonderful things at this period of the year. But in the HR space, what we experience is beyond the events, activities, and all other things that I have mentioned earlier. What we experience in the HR space usually is staff related, and of course, it also goes into organizational reforms. And that's the reason why we are having this conversation today. We want to ensure we x-ray some of those details that are relevant to the organization. So we're going to be talking about fraud detection and prevention. We have lots of different areas to the trend, the end of the year. We have different areas to the end of the year activity in every organization. We've spoken about the employer, the employee, and the job seekers before now. But now, narrowing down to the employers and the employees, they are the ones who are most affected by this. I'll give you random examples. This is the season where organizations that run daily sales or have services that are being rendered, and they have principal officers who are handling such activities, they need to be more careful and be more involved in the details of their business, because this is the time when fraud happens, particularly even in a bank, whereby you have the so-called fraudsters out there, and they will do all they can to get through to those key staff who are involved in the operation of the banking activity. So it's always important for organizations to be conscious that this season of the year is not just for us to look at our books, try to reconcile the books, work on the strategy and our operation, but it's important for organizations to also look into the risk, what could possibly be hitting your company at this period of the year, because it's been seen over the years, and that's why we're saying is the trend. Most HR experts, professionals have this also to attest to. While you're thinking of the restructuring, the reforms, getting new people, working with new hands, you should also be very much aware that the people you have will also be thinking of a lot more than what you're just thinking. So what exactly is fraud, and why is it expected in organizations? at this particular period of the year. From experience, this season of the year, most of the fraud issues that have been recorded are at their peak at this period of the year. Many organizations would have staff pilfering now. Of course, sometimes this week we still handle the fraud case with one of the clients that we are managing, and of course we expected it, and we had the processes in place that was able to fish out such stuff. It's not just in organizations where they have tangible goods. You also have fraud possible in organizations where they also deal in services. Any organization where you have trust, where you've been able to, you have some form of trust, or you've entrusted some part of your process to someone who is not, let me say, a stakeholder in that business, it becomes a concern if such persons are not trustworthy. And how do you tell who is trustworthy and who is not trustworthy? You might not be able to tell. It might just be you test the waters, you ensure your processes are done properly, and you have your backup plan in case the persons you have managing the processes are not holding forth as expected. So it's just important to be aware, and just keep in mind that you can't totally take your process away from this risk. For as long as you have people who are involved in your business that did not invest directly in the business, then you should expect that you will have one or two of such instances coming up. And that's the reason why we are discussing fraud detection and protection. So what I would first want to discuss or look at is what exactly is fraud. I know there will be different definitions to the word fraud, and it's not cast in stones. It's based on what you've experienced, how you've seen it, and what has happened around you before. But practically, fraud is a breach of trust in any form, any frame you choose to X-ray. It's a breach of trust. So it is perpetrating to obtain money or any selfish gain from goods or services entrusted in your care around a business environment, even beyond business environment, in any area where you have people. So it's a breach of trust. That, of course, is what fraud is, and it's not the success rate of that intention that is seen as fraud for us as HR professionals. It is the intention in itself that is to be identified and curbed early, because if you don't find what exactly is the propelling force for that fraud, you would have that person re-strategize, recalibrate, and find a better way to get into your system and get out with that gain. Now, this is not a function, this is not tied to a collapse in the welfare package or not taking proper care or taking proper care of the staff. A staff that is well catered for, a staff that has the best welfare plan, can still think of committing fraud. It's not tied to whether the welfare package is poor or the company is not paying so well. It's a nature in mankind. It's something anyone can be found doing. You can't say, oh, it's done because he is from here, he's from there, or he's a man or a woman. It can be done by anyone, and that, of course, is what fraud is. And the areas where fraud is being carried out or perpetrated is mostly in the business environment, because that's where you would have your employees. And of course, you also have it in some houses. You have it even in churches. Of course, that's also an establishment that of some sort. Anywhere where you have people gathered, the possibilities of fraud is to be expected. And we honestly advise that towards the end of the year, now in particular, we advise process keepers. We advise structural leaders or departmental heads to be more involved in their business, because that's the first step to identifying if there is fraud in any environment. And if you are not careful, if your business is a small business, you might experience the kind of fraud or the kind of shake-up that might make starting up the new year a little bit of a difficult task for your organization. So the question is, how exactly do I get to know when there is fraud in my establishment? I'm just going to give random examples, but let me even give us the different types of fraud that are possible in organizations. You could have asset misappropriation as one of the types of fraud that could happen in organizations, and that refers to you have systems, or let's say you have phones in your organization that are kept in the store, and it's not been used for a while, but you felt, okay, when the need arises, we would always pull up such assets and make use of them. And some of your staff just are aware that these phones have been here for a while. And if you are in a business whereby you deal in goods in huge volume, you have those items stored. Because of the huge number or the volume of those goods that you have, some staff would assume you won't know what is the number that you have, and they feel if I take one out of it, that of course wouldn't be bad, it might not even be noticed, and that in itself is fraud. So that's one of the type of fraud. Another one is skimming, and skimming is trying to edge someone out or with the objective of having all the gain, and that is also possible, though of course in contracts, in different kinds of engagement. Another one is disbursement. You have funds to be disbursed to people, and the fund is meant for a particular purpose. You choose to underpay, you choose to overpay, you choose to not pay at all. That's another possibility of fraud. Expense reimbursement is another type of fraud that we have in organizations that could happen at this season of the year. Now, we're just mentioning these things so that you can also look at what relates to your own organization and see how you can get this out of the way early enough. So, expense reimbursement. Take for instance, you have a particular staff activity, and you have released or fund that has been allocated, but that fund also has miscellaneous and has some emergency funds attached to it. So you don't have all the funds apportioned to the activities. So you were expecting staff to make the fund, to use the fund appropriately, and at the end of that activity to make a reimbursement, to return some of those funds that are not used back to the business. It's a common practice in the workspace. A lot of staff will look up for invoices or cost elements to justify those unspent funds and find a way to have those funds in their pocket. Now, as innocent as some of the staff may look, this is how a lot of staff find a way to live beyond the salaries they earn. And some of these staff will tell you, okay, the money has already been disbursed, so why are they bothered about returning it? They've already spent it, and why are they taking it too seriously? Or why do they expect it to be returned into the business? But in the real form of it, this is also a form of fraud. Fraud can also be identified in payroll. This particular type of fraud is seen in the case whereby you have ghost workers, and you don't, at this season of the year, you will have actually done disengagements, you've let go some of your staff, you've done some restructuring, some have resigned, just a lot of things has happened in the organization, and your payroll officer deliberately leaving those staff on the payroll without having to take them off the schedule. That is another form of fraud, because what could possibly happen is have an understanding with the exited staff and say, okay, I'll still get you paid, but when you get paid, whatever it is that comes to you, I take a percentage, you take a percentage. These are different approach through which fraud can be carried out in an organization. Now, of course, you also can have fraud through financial statements, padding, and alteration. This is peculiar. This is mostly seen in the account departments of organizations, and of course in other areas whereby there is need for such reports to be generated. Now, information misrepresentation also can be another form of fraud. I'm going to run through these things very quickly so that I don't take too much time, and I intend to make this broadcast as brief as possible so that it's easier for people to download and share. Now, corruption generally, bribery, conflict of interest, related parties, tax evasion, these are different means through which fraud can be carried out in an organization. And of course, it creates a lot of risk in the business. And this is how these things are being carried out. This is how these things organizations create access for those staff to carry out things like this. Well, you give them access to your systems or data, and they use such access for personal gain. It's used for their own objective. Take, for instance, you have office internet, and you have staff choosing to use, of course, this might not be direct fraud as the case may be, but let's just look at, you have office consumables, and you have these consumables kept for office use, and there's a staff in charge, and the staff chooses to take one of the consumables for his own personal use. Take, for instance, probably it's a hand wash or so. These are different means through which we could have such frauds carried out. Then change of system for personal gain. Let's assume, okay, let me just give this direct example. There was a particular staff with an organization I manage that resumed her shift. It's a business where they deal in daily sales. Resumed her shift, and a customer approached that particular cashier, was about making sales, and the cashier was expected to log in with her own ID. As against that laid down rule of logging in with her ID, he decided to use a staff who was signing out ID to make the sales. Now, when the sales was made, she kept the money in her pocket and logged into her own ID properly and started her sales. Now, when the staff that signed out earlier went to drop her cash with the account department, she found out that a particular amount of money was missing. And she was sure that she counted her money before she left her system. But because she did not sign out of the system as at when she was leaving the workspace, that was the opportunity the other lady had to be able to make that sales and kept the money. Well, investigation still revealed that money got missing, and there was someone who used her access to make sales without her being informed, and that was how we were able to trace that fraud. So these are possibilities of how this fraud could happen in organization. Yeah. Then at the same time, connival, you have people conniving, having to conspire with people, or let me say competitors of businesses, just for some gain. You don't be surprised that you have some of your staff who feed your competitors information just for gain, and they get some sort of gain, and that could sabotage the effort you make. And when do you think this kind of thoughts will be most sellable, or will be most relevant to the perpetrators? It will be this season of the year. That's very, very important for us to keep in mind. Of course, conflict of interest is another reason why you should have your process keepers stay at alert. Let me say from experience as well, we had a particular person who is into same business as his employer, and the person will take on the clients that the employer turns down. Then the person will still make effort to have some of those clients that the employer probably is still in the negotiation stage with, and that is another form of fraud, and this is almost almost it's very possible. It's something you can't avoid in a business environment, because truthfully, how do you even get the business done? You can't get your business done without having to exercise some level of trust, by having to trust some people who work with you. And when you trust them, you relieve some part of the business process in their custody. And if that is done, you have some of these people do just what they feel is right for them. And that is how you can now become a victim, if they have not earned your trust, or they don't deserve the trust that you've committed in their custody. So this, of course, is different eye openers with respect to fraud in organizations. And I would always say that if there is nothing you're doing, or if for HR executives or professionals, no matter how busy you are with all other activities such as appraisal, restructuring, end of the year, get together parties and everything, please don't take your eyes off this possibility, because this is a particular part of your business process you should not ignore, because it's very much possible. Different types of fraud are the different things that employers should look at. So when you are in the kind of business where you sell goods, let's give an example, a supermarket, you need to put more control in your inventory management. You need to look at your sales. You need to look at the possibility of pilfering, so your security needs to be more fortified. If it is a service rendering organization, you need to start mopping up your data, your documents, your service materials, and mopping them up, and also tracking their use. And it's more difficult in service rendering organizations, because you can almost not monitor all the services that you render. If an information is exchanged verbally, you might not even know that it's gone out of your business. You will just think it's still there. And I think one of the companies I've worked with before, what they say when they're about having staff meeting or management meeting, it's what happens in Las Vegas stays in Las Vegas, which means that everybody should learn to keep confidential information confidential. And that, of course, is my counsel at this period of the year. So this is just a general discussion. It's not any structured training. It's just to bring to the consciousness of business owners and employers of labor that this period of the year, you need to look at different types of fraud and how it can affect your business. If the business is important enough to you, and the stakeholders and the board members and the business owners and the shareholders, I think you should also put some attention into the different types of fraud that could be carried out within your business premises, and find a way to mitigate against it so that you don't get caught unawares. Of course, look at how it can affect you if there is even a success to that fraud that you have identified. If the perpetrator scales through, what is the possibility of, what is the impact, what is the risk you could be exposed to? Then the next thing that employers of labor organizations should think about is, how do we control this? And controlling such fraud, you don't need to task yourself. Just randomly make research into what has it happened before, where has it happened before, how was it avoided, what exactly should I do, what have they done before, and for our business, what risk do we have, and how do we avoid such risk? Now, you definitely would have some gap in your business. This gap you would have in your business, it's important for you also to see how to control this gap. Let me give you an example. Imagine you have one of your key officers. He is very hardworking. He has the skills. He is good enough on the job. You've always trusted that person to be an asset to the business. And you felt, okay, this person will not would not be a traitor to the business. But eventually, he happens to be the chief pin of the fraud that was identified eventually in the business. You would have to deal with the person, and in dealing with the person, the option you have eventually would be to take off that staff after recovering the subject matter of the fraud. If it's a particular document or document infringement, like we mentioned under the types of fraud that could happen. If it's document infringement, then you have to retrieve the document and see how much of damage control you can do. Now, when that is done, that staff most likely would have lost his job. Except I really don't know the case whereby you would have such fraud, because that's what is termed as gross misconduct. Now, when you have such staff carrying out such fraud and you lay off such staff, you would now need to control the gap created, because the gap created is key to the success of the rest of the operations that you have. And of course, we've always mentioned in the training, trying to bring to bear the importance of your process. Now, there are human beings, and that's the human capital or human resources that drives your process. Then you now have the rules that keeps them. So you need also to think of the gap that will be created. How do you intend to control it? Do you need to do a little bit of the adjustment in your human capital placement, manpower placement, or you need to run an immediate recruitment activity, or you need to pull from your support staff and have some of them fill in the gaps? All right, then you also need to look at what exactly is the business impact. All right, what exactly is the business impact? Is it capable of stopping or affecting the sales or the revenue of the business at the end of the year? And well, with all sense of caution, it's important to look more in the account or inventory or store department of your organization. And if it is not kind of company where you deal with tangible goods, it might be important to look at the departments that has those particular services that gives you the highest revenue at this particular period of the year, because of course that is the goods you're selling. So if it's that you render certain training services, let's imagine a company that is into training, you render training services, and you know this period of the year, we should watch out for those staff of yours who would probably take excuses, probably telling you they're not feeling fine. Yeah. It might be that there is one of your clients that they need to render your own services to. In fact, it could be services under your name, and you would not be the beneficiary. Now, this is not to confine anyone to a particular title of okay, this can happen or this cannot happen here. It could be anyone. We'll still get to the point where we'll talk about who are those that could perpetrate fraud. Anybody could be involved. Anyone could be found carrying out this fraudulent activity. And let me also mention, it does not stigmatize anybody to have found himself in that circle before now, but the bottom line is you should find yourself avoiding it at all costs. Ensuring that you are not found as a victim, or you don't get caught unawares if you are the employer. That's the whole idea. So now we look at the things that are key to fraud. For a fraudulent activity to happen, for that to happen in any organization, three things need to align. There must be rationalization, there must be the opportunity to carry it out, and of course, there must be a gain in mind. So, should I use the Nigerian common saying that for you to catch a thief, you need to think like a thief, or for you to catch a monkey, you also need to be able to hop like a monkey. So it's just to tell you that you need to understand the areas or the conditions that would be right for fraud to happen. And what are the conditions? There must be rationalization. You must internalize it. Tell yourself that, okay, this is the only way to go. So you as an employer of labor need to also think in this direction. What are the possible rationalizations that these people or the workforce or the prospective fraudsters will be thinking at this period of the year? So if you are into sales of goods, or you have lots of goods, and you know that these goods are kept in a store and there is an officer involved, you know somehow that these goods it's possible for such staff to pick those goods and want to sell without having to keep an accurate record in your business. And if this happens, you might not be able to get these goods, or you might not be able to get the value, or you will not even get to know on time. While we're handling the fraud issue that happened in the course of the week, we even found out that some other organizations had instances where staff would pick items valuable but handy and keep in their pockets, keep in unimaginable parts of their body that they are sure will not be searched, and will move out of the business and eventually go and make an exchange of such goods for money.
Excuse me.
Yes, and this, of course,
Morning, sir.
yes, please, Miss Janet. So this becomes a problem that needs to be solved. So there are different mindsets that these perpetrators keep regularly, and this mindset needs to be worked on to avoid the company being the victim. And I've always said it's, of course, a lot of people have gone through this, and some recovered, some never did. You ask the people considering this fraud that, what's the gain, and what do I have guaranteed? What do I have that is a temporary gain? Now, if I make this gain, look at what I am risking if caught. What happens? Do I think it's a balanced deal? Let me ask you. You're making a gain of, let's say, 1 million. That 1 million is a one-off gain, and you are going to lose a secured job that you can have for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, depending on how long you want to work there. Job and your good name. After all of it, it comes to the gain is gone, the security is gone, the job is gone, and what you have gained probably was recovered from you. So it's still lost. So what do you have in returns? So that's just a note of caution to anyone considering fraud. And of course, just know that via this particular broadcast, a lot of organizations would even come to consciousness of being more aware of every revenue generating part of their business, to look more carefully and try to avoid fraud. Now, beyond the rationalization, the other reality, or that a fraudster considers, is the opportunity. So when they've told themselves, okay, I need to do this, this is the way to go, this is what I need to do, the next thing that comes to mind is looking for the opportunity. Now, that is where the organization comes in, where you need to tell yourself that we need to make our process watertight so that we don't create the opportunity for fraud. So if you're a head of department, that staff that might be disengaged, that also has a critical part of your business in his as his job description, how do you start offboarding the person, taking off those assignments from the persons, to ensure that you are not at the risk of losing a critical part of your business? I'm aware of a particular staff that was laid off for whatever reasons best known to the organization, but the aspect of their business in that particular staff's custody was not retrieved. And after the staff left, the staff still made good business out of the organization. And the question will now have been, who is monitoring this the revenue source for that organization? Who is monitoring the sources of income? Who is monitoring the goods or the services that have been exchanged for money in that organization? So the fraud star or whoever is trying to carry out that fraudulent activity would definitely be looking for an opportunity, and you should make sure that they don't have that opportunity. Very, very, very important. Now, the other part of the business, or the other factor key to fraud in any establishment, is the gain. Everyone would be looking for, what exactly do I stand to gain? What do I stand to gain? So these are very important areas for us to look at and avoid as much as possible. So types of the fraud, we've mentioned that already. We said conflict of interest, bribery incentives, billing schemes, expense reimbursements. We've mentioned these different areas, and these are things that you should keep in mind. Don't forget, we mentioned that a fraudster will look for 3 things to be able to carry out that fraudulent activity, and all heads of departments or all process keepers, all organizations should try their best to keep these things out of the way, to make it impossible. And that is, they want to rationalize it, so try and disabuse their mind from whatever possibilities. It's not a bad idea to have sensitization meetings in your organization this particular season. Ensure that you tell them the possibilities of fraud. Also think ahead of them and open their eyes to where fraud could happen, and tell them what measures you have in place to avoid such fraud, and do everything possible to avoid creating the opportunity for them. And of course, whatever gain that could be the motivation, if you can, as a company, make it come to them, and not for them to try to scheme their way into getting it. Try and give them a possibility of earning it, as against gaining it through the other means. So now, who exactly commits fraud? Who has the capacity to commit fraud? This is the very funny part of this discussion, because fraud is not unique to anybody, any tribe, any gender. Anyone can be found committing fraud. In fact, I can bet you that many leaders right now also have been involved at one point or the other. But funny enough, they've gone past that particular stage of their lives, and now they become watchmen or women for the same thing. But it's not the morals now, but it is talking about the capacity. Anyone who has the capacity to desire, to want something, or to or desire a kind of development in life or in career, stands a chance of committing fraud. So it's an everyday people classification. Anyone can commit fraud. Anyone. Once the justification is there, that's a rationalization. Once the opportunity is created, and of course there is a gain in mind, anybody can be found committing fraud. It's just important that you make sure you're not the victim, and aside being the victim, you create, you seize the opportunity, you remove the opportunity from the perpetrators, so that you don't give them the right atmosphere to carry it out. Remember, they are victims when there is any fraud committed. It's either the person who carried out the fraud and was caught will become the victim, or the organization that the fraud was committed against would be the victim. And if there is a victim, the word victim doesn't even connote anything good. It means that it's a bad feel. So just avoid being the victim. And this is more like a sensitization call to organizations. Just know this season of the year, that is very, very, very expected. In fact, beyond even organizations, these are the seasons where you have lots of armed robbery cases and different kidnapping cases. So you should expect that in your little country called the company you oversee, because of course it's seen as your own country, where you need to also sit and ensure that things go the right way. In that your own little country, you will possibly have people considering such, and you don't want to be the victim in that conversation. So I'm sure we are making progress in this conversation. So who commits fraud again? Let's get into the details of it. Unusually high personally indebted persons are people who could consider committing fraud. Now, it's very, very important that you note that fraud is more to people or people who are heavily indebted stand the risk of committing fraud. Please get this chart for me. Stand the risk of committing fraud because the weight of their debt is all over them. It's staring at them, and they would be thinking, how do I get past this? And that, of course, becomes a problem. So it's important that you, if you can, you could create little incentives, create a loan plan for them so that instead of having to think of stealing from you, they have a way to meet up that. Another set of persons who stand a higher or a big chance or a bigger risk of committing fraud are people who are into excessive gambling and are involved in alcohol or drugs. Of course, I think it's not a common, it's not a new thought in the world that people who are into gambling, who are into drugs, will do anything to stay connected with this addiction. So these people could be found committing fraud, and you should, as an organization, find a way to mitigate against this. Now, another thing that that also could lead to fraud in an organization is undue family pressure, undue peer pressure, undue family pressure. Many people will be under the pressure of meeting up with family responsibilities at this particular period of the year, and that can also give them the right justification to get involved in what is inappropriate and what is wrong. So it's good that you know, as an employer, that this also could push people into fraud. So these are literally everyday kind of persons, people you see on the street. You have a lot of your staff who are currently on loan. Many of your staff might do a little bit of drugs. You might not be able to figure this out during interviews, except you are a very thorough HR professional who would ask that much questions. So we also have undue family pressure this season of the year. In fact, many individuals have it at the back of their mind that once it's 21st, 22nd of December, they need to travel. And of course, it's a common practice, the fares for different means of transportation even go high at this period of the year. So it becomes a responsibility they feel they need to do, and they find a means to get it done. And let me quickly mention, if you feel the burden to travel, I don't think it's a bad thought, but just be aware, January is always a very long month. Very, very, very long month. So it might be important that you save enough for the 60 days in January, like it's commonly described or like commonly said to have. Now, a lot of people also commit fraud due to dissatisfaction with the job, feeling underpaid. So it might be a very good season also for HR professionals or organizations to look at the staff and identify staff who feel underpaid or underappreciated, who feel not valued, because people like that are the biggest prey to be lured into fraud. So they are the people, these are persons who could be tempted to commit fraud. Now, a lot of people with greed. I said something in a training I had yesterday at a client's place, that every human being has a measure of greed. That's the reason why you want to have personal belongings. You have things that belongs to you. That's a measure of greed. You just want to own certain things. That's to an extent a definition of greed. But when the greed is excessive and not controlled, it becomes a problem. So overwhelming desire to have personal gain is another problem that could also lead to fraud, because there will be lots of benefits shared. No doubt, companies will declare profit. There will be end of the year benefits. There will be 13th month. Lots of benefits being shared in this season of the year. There is that possibility of someone wanting to have more than the other person. And that, of course, can lead to fraud. And that, of course, is one of the things that should be avoided, and not just avoided by the staff or the persons who stand a chance of committing the fraud, but by the organization. I would want to say at this point in time, feel free to share this particular broadcast with your friends so that they can also join in the discussion, and we can also take questions as we discuss. And apologies to the Facebook audience, because the Facebook audience are off now. The phone went off, so it's been charged, and the Facebook audience will be back on shortly. So overwhelming desire for personal gain is one of the reasons. Now, the other categories of persons who could be found committing fraud are people who believe that job is in jeopardy, meaning that they have that mindset that I could lose my job, so what is there to risk? Before they take the job from me, let me find what I can take from them. And the fraud might not be financial alone. It could be financial. It could even be in the area of your intellectual property. It could also be in the area of the services that you render. Anything can be used to perpetrate fraud, and that, of course, is good for you people, for HR professionals, for organizations to think about. So this is still us talking about who commits fraud. The next set of persons who are liable to commit fraud are close associates of the business, of your key employees, and your suppliers. Anybody who has earned some level of trust from you as a business owner stand a chance of committing fraud, because they are the weak link. If you are a top shot in an organization, or you are a director, or you are a CEO, the possibilities are people who are close to you will use you as a currency to get personal gains. And this season will not be an exception to the period when such can be done. Another instance will be when you are in you have family members who know your capacity or your relevance on the job. They could also use you as a currency for personal gain. So these are the people who can commit fraud. So remember what I said earlier, that there are three factors that needs to be in place for fraud to be carried out, and those factors are always there whenever you have the issue of fraud. And I think I will give I'll give an example of that. The first factor is they tend to look for a reason. They rationalize that action, because most times when people are not convinced, they don't take step. So they convince themselves that this is the way to go. So they rationalize it, even give themselves valid arguments. Example, and they're not paying me well, that was why. Oh, my mom is sick, that's why I had to do it. Oh, in fact, a lot of reasons. And that's why I said, with all sense of caution, that anybody could be found in that particular net. It's just important that you are aware at the season of the year and do everything possible to avoid it. Don't be a victim, and don't consider making someone else a victim of fraud. But the whole moral of this particular conversation is ensure that you avoid fraud as much as possible. Either, if you are considering it, just know somebody is thinking of what you're thinking, and you could be caught and you will lose what is more important to you than what you intend to gain by that fraud. And if you are not caught, you might not like the feel of making the organization a victim in the case of fraud. So they rationalize it in most cases. They look for the opportunity to do it. Just be aware that no one commits fraud without seeking deliberately the opportunity. It doesn't happen by chance. It goes with careful thought process. It is carefully planned. Then there is always a gain. There is always a gain in that case. Now, some of the staff that also can commit fraud are those staff that are very, 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 very hardworking or seen to be very, 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 very important to the business. They are the ones prone to committing fraud. Why is this? Because a lot of trust is committed. There's a lot of trust placed on them. The organization seems to place premium on their skill, on their intellect, on their capacity, and look away from the possibilities of being turned around against the business. And I say it. You can't. It's not what you can affix to gender. You can't affix to age. You can't affix to tribe. It is just a human nature that we need to deal with. And people who you put so much trust in are the ones who even stand the chance of committing fraud the most. So the smart ones who each time you need a job done, they are always there to get the job done. You need this done. You give them assignments. They deliver on time. They are the ones who also might be on the radar the most at this season of the year, because they've earned the trust. They could tell you things you won't vet. You might not even ask them questions. You just assume that is what it is, and of course, hidden behind those little counsels they give you might be hidden, might also be gains that are personal. So this is not to mean that the trust in a business should be taken out completely, but it just calls that there is need for more checks now. And for me as an employer right now, I honestly think if you're a good staff to me, I will do everything possible to protect you from the possibilities of committing fraud. Because the temptation would come, you might not be able to resist it. It will cost you a lot on your own part, and also cost the company, because money, time, training, a lot will have been invested in you as a person. So it's key for organizations to start thinking of how to help the staff not get involved in that fraud. Make it impossible. Yes, you would replace them. Yes, you would get a replacement, but you also would have also lost a particular part of your business. And it's good that you think that way. All right? So, give examples. You have someone who is your procurement officer giving you fake suppliers. Those suppliers don't exist, but generates invoices, gives you those items, sources the items, puts his own prices, and claim it's from a supplier, and of course you keep paying. This is a means to which you could actually be defrauded as an organization. Of course, you have your staff who you use, who you delegate to develop processes for your business. You expose the future of your business to them, tell them a lot of things about the future of the organization. They actually might merchandise that for a gain from your competitors, when they will say, okay, we can tell you what they are planning to do. So when you start on time, it of course would put you ahead of them in business. But what do you have to give me? And if you give me what you are offering, then that's fine. I can also release to you the intellectual property or the strategies that they have in place. That is in itself is also fraud. We already mentioned the one from payroll, where you could have a payroll officer have ghost workers. The staff are no longer in that department, and mostly at the top of the ladder, you might not know what happens at the grassroots. You have someone go and employ for ad hoc staff. For me, he employs 2, leaves 2 out, and you are in the mindset, okay, you have you have 4 staff, and he actually has 2 staff working with him, and he has the remaining 2 to be ghost workers, but keeps giving you on the payroll bill for 4 staff. So this is another means through which fraud could happen. For business managers also, they are also in the face, or they could be a target as well of being wooed into fraud. So these are different things, these are different areas that I thought to bring to our notice, that fraud is not something that we should take lightly at this period of the year. Organizations will have a lot of their staff consider that, not because they want to, not because they are bad staff, but the season, so many factors would hit them now, and those factors will possibly get them to consider fraud. So you should try not to be the victim, and also see the possibilities of helping them not to be the victim, so that your company would also be able to maintain the sanity required. So what's my recommendation at this period of the year? I advise organizations or employers of labor or HR professionals to look through the process again and identify the possible areas where fraud could be carried out. And those areas, create a plan to avoid it. Create a plan to avoid it. Now, avoiding it is not enough. Some people could still beat your strategy or your plans. And if they choose to beat your plans, what exactly do you intend to do as a cover-up in case it happens? So that you don't have the fraud happen and you realize that it's affecting a bigger chunk of your business. So it's important you ask yourself, how do we intend to handle this if it happens? And I can bet you that a lot of organizations are not even considering fraud. So even if it happens, they start asking, what do we do? They start asking questions, and they handle it in the most unprofessional ways, that even the perpetrators of the fraud can even gain some advantage over them. And this, of course, is the reason why you need to think ahead. You need to understand that they need rationalization, they seek the opportunity, and there's always a gain. And if fraud is happening in the organization, it would be that someone is looking away from the key areas of the business where fraud could have been carried out. So it might not be a bad idea also to run a training in the organization this period of the year on fraud detection and protection. It might not just be because you envisage them to commit fraud, but you want to raise their consciousness. Try not to be a victim, and don't be the one perpetrating the fraud, because if you are the one, this is what we have in plan to do. And if you are the victim, then that means you looked away from your watch, and that, of course, is important. And it's also critical at this point for business owners to call their departmental heads, the head of units, head of departments, and also to call the HR, the head of accounts, these 2 key departments, and tell them to reinforce their process, to realign their process to avoid this from happening. Because those are the 2 key departments aside the operations or the general manager of any business. The account, the HR who manage the people, and maybe the strategic corporate head, also very important. So just keep this awareness and ensure that we don't become victims at this period of the year. So this is just to open your eyes. We're still discussing the trend. We're talking about the trend, the cycle now within organizations. We're trying to identify things that employers should keep in mind. And don't forget, we have another broadcast on Friday, and that we're going to have people come discuss with us from different parts of the world. And we're still discussing the trend. But we're looking at the employer, we're looking at the employee, and we're looking at the job seekers. We want to understand the relationship that exist between these people within this particular period of the year. And I have an HR, the head of HR of a particular organization in Nigeria coming in, and I have a university researcher from United Kingdom also joining us on that discussion. So please ensure that you join us, or you endeavor to watch the recorded broadcast after the live session has ended, because you definitely gain one or two things from that. So we've spoken about the trend and we've spoken about fraud. Please, talking to my staff, I should say thank you guys for not being victims of fraud so far, and I definitely expect that you will not be victims. And general counsel to clients that please raise the consciousness within the business that fraud is possible at this season of the year, and with that possibility, everybody needs to watch the process more carefully and make sure that it is avoided as much as possible, so that you don't have your business run and the unexpected takes you off business at the new year. Then we would be calling it a close now. Looking forward to the discussion on Friday on the trend. So I will take questions if I have questions. If I don't have any question at the moment, you can leave your questions and I will ensure that I drop answers to those questions. Please share the video to your loved ones, share to your staff. You could also have this also replayed in your organization to ensure that you just help them hear what we've just discussed. Thank you so much. I would advise every job seeker out there to please send a message to our office line requesting to join our vacancy group, because we share a lot of vacancies there that could benefit you and make your job search shorter, and also give you an opportunity to secure that job you're looking for. We have lots of them. If I choose to tell you about the vacancies we have now, there's a lot I would not be able to mention. So it's just advisable you join our WhatsApp group, and of course you will see those vacancies there. And you can also join the Telegram group. The official line is the number is 09038283138. 09038283138. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a very wonderful day.